When did Little Caesar come together, and how did that band come together?
We formed in like 87, and by 88 we had, Jimmy Iovine as our manager, and we had all these record labels chasing us. It was really quick. I mean, the band wasn't together 6 months before we had, one of the most powerful men in the music business as our manager. And as soon as people heard who was managing us, all the labels started sniffing around. And because we stood out, I remember it's not even in the book. We did a showcase for Clive Davis
Oh, wow.
and from Arista. And he saw the band and he was incredibly complimentary of me and my singing. And he wanted to sign the band. And Jimmy was like, they're not really a rock label. Let's keep looking. And so we passed on Clive Davis, oddly enough. Um, and, wound up signing with Geffen Records, thinking that, well, they've got, at this point, Guns N' Roses is really starting to break. And, they got Aerosmith. And, how can you go wrong? That's a rock label right there. Little did we know there was 260 other bands on the label you never heard of. But you don't find this kind of stuff out till you're kind of knee deep in it.
There's a quote in the book: "We were a rough-looking band of rock and roll assholes."
Yeah. Our T-shirt on the back actually said "the bums of rock and roll." Our
Yeah.
first, yeah. Well, we looked really scummy. People, and the Geffen publicity department was really trying to play us up as being, making Guns N' Roses look like, choir boys, which really wasn't true. We were friends with all those guys. Um,
Well, what's
but
behind the quote you have too is it was both our saving grace and our tragic downfall.
it was because, unfortunately, the point person that we hooked up with at the label, a guy by the name of John Kalodner. Now, John Kalodner's got the reputation of working with Aerosmith, AC/DC, uh, a million bands. But John is also, when you find out none of those bands could be in the same room with him. So, John was a very polarizing kind of a figure, um, was really in love with himself, had a really incredibly large ego. And John had a really narrow, short sighted vision, and thought that the band to fit in should try to produce itself on a more slick sort of an approach, which wound up getting magnified even worse because we started working with Bob Rock as our producer, um, of Metallica fame, and engineered the Aerosmith records, and he produced the Cult. And
Dr.
at
Feelgood.
that time he wasn't known for his producer skills yet. We signed on with him as being an engineer that was moving into production, and we told him we wanted to make a really 70s kind of sounding record. Actually, the kind of records that Soundgarden wound up making, and bands from that were more sort of what was considered Seattle, which was really more of an honest, down to earth production stuff. None of these big reverbs and giant drum sounds and all this stuff. So when we were making that kind of really stripped down 70s record, right in the middle of that, Bob Rock, who had produced Motley Crue, but it didn't come out yet, um, Dr. Feelgood came out and it went right to number one. And all of a sudden, Bob wanted to make a totally different kind of record than we could make. And ultimately, it bit us in the ass because here's this band that they started sonically pushing towards sounding softer. And yet, all the visuals we were putting out was really rough. And that kind of was, um, uh, it made things more complicated. And then on top of it, as I outline in the book, there's a whole lot of train wrecks that happened literally in a 6-week period that completely torpedoed our business.
And you spoke your mind. You spoke up.
Oh
And
yeah,
that
yeah.
that
It got
was
it got me into a lot of trouble.
yeah, it's like how dare you? You're supposed to sit there and just say yes sir, yes sir, yes sir, whatever.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't, when, because the thing is that everybody in the music, and we had signed the largest recording contract for any new band in the history of the music business.
I saw that in the book, yeah.
Yeah, so everybody behind the scenes at Billboard and Rolling Stone and all the trade magazines, they knew about us and were waiting for this record to come out. Everybody was curious, what's this whole thing about that Jimmy Iovine's managing and John Kalodner is A&Ring and Bob Rock is producing. And when all of their business kind of went in the toilet for Geffen and all the timing for us and our release went to the toilet, I started to get phone calls from all these writers and all these major trade magazines asking what happened. And I told the 100% truth. And David Geffen didn't like that. We became enemies. So on top of us hitting, in a 4-week window, we're out on the tour, out on tour with Kiss, which you would think is a great thing. We're selling lots of records. We're getting lots of radio airplay. And all of a sudden, within this 1-month period, David Geffen sells the label. Our records aren't available in the stores. The label manager at the time winds up getting fired for masturbating on his secretary. So there's no one at the helm. You can't find our records in the stores because they're sitting in one company's warehouses yet to be shipped to the new company's warehouses. And David Geffen and Jimmy Iovine have a fight over what was to be a side story. Our manager, who is Jimmy Iovine, decides to start Interscope Records, huge record label, successful label. And at the time, in its early, in its startup idea, David Geffen heard about it and called Jimmy and said, I want to distribute, Interscope Records. And Jimmy said, no, I don't like your distribution. First off, you just sold the label and blah, blah, blah. And David got really angry at Jimmy and they became enemies at the time. And, David Geffen called us up and said, you got to fire Jimmy Iovine. Like, what do you mean about to fire Jimmy Iovine? Just because guys are having a fight? Oh, no. According to California law, you can't have a manager that's also a record distributor. It's against California state law. And we're like, what are you talking about? He goes, well, if he now is the owner of Interscope Records, he can't be your manager anymore. So we had to fire Jimmy Iovine. So this is the kind of stuff that in the rough and tumble world of the music business, behind the scenes in corporate rock and roll, this is the kind of shit that goes on. And these people like David Geffen or Jimmy Iovine or whatever, they could not give a shit the outcome from their choices. If it, blows up a band's career, so be it. David Geffen was kind of, so what, man? Shit happens,
92, the second album, Influence, came out. Now, by this time, the label just gave up on the band.
They knew after this whole nightmare on the first record that the second record was just performative. It was just, they were obligated to do a second record with us, so they gave us a very small budget. We just went in there and we knocked out a record really quick. They had absolutely zero intention of promoting it. We had a new manager at that point because they made us fire Jimmy. We had a great manager by the name of Herbie Herbert.
Yeah, man, that was from Journey fame, which I didn't know.
Carlos Santana and Bad English and all of that. And, Herbie came aboard and, the first record was pronounced dead after only one single. And he's like, listen, let's just fall back. Let's just recoup. Now that the warehouse situation's worked out and all of this stuff is worked out, let's go make a great second record. And I think there's light at the end of this tunnel. You're still a great band and a great record speaks for itself and blah, 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 blah. And he's like, I see light at the end of the tunnel. And then he called up and said, okay, I'm coming down to LA. I'm going to have a meeting with everybody, all the, big wigs at Geffen, and we'll get this back on track. And he calls me after the meeting. He goes, remember when I said the light at the end of the tunnel? I'm like, yeah. He goes, well, it's a freight train. And it's coming at you, because they made it really clear that they don't even need to hear the second record. The second record was kind of done, and they're done. And, and we were like, okay, great. Well, then, shit, we can go sign with another label now. We're done. They want to drop us. They want us to go away. And unfortunately, that's when, we had a meeting at Geffen, and they were like, well, we're going to let you go, but we're we're also not going to let you reform and go to another label and make this label look bad. If you sell 1 million records, it's going to make our label look bad for not selling 1 million records on the first 2 records. So they exercised what's called a key man clause in the contract, where they let the band go, but they held on to me as an individual for a period of years, and they weren't going to let me go to reform on the label with the same group of guys. And it was really kind of a crushing blow to me. That's kind of when I started doing drugs and shit, because David Geffen made it really clear that he had no intention of doing anything with me or my career. You know, fuck you. You're the asshole that was talking shit about me in Billboard. You know, so
Yeah.
he can be very vindictive. And he was so with Don Henley. He was so with Neil Young. You know, he's got that in him. He's got that streak in him.
Yeah, this is when around 92 things get rough for you.
Yeah,
The
at
book
this
is
point we're kind of into 93, 94.
right. The book, by the way, is judge this book by its cover. Ron Young. It's out now. It's been out. So people can get it all the usual places. But
a couple months.
Yep. So this is where the heroin. I remember Artie Lang, the comedian, saying the first time I ever did heroin, he goes, I knew I was fucked because it felt so good. What was your introduction to it? You said you did it a few times in the years past.
I did it a few times over the years. My drug of choice was music and trying to be successful. What I didn't realize was I wasn't in pain those recreational times before. And so though I liked the drug, I knew it was a dangerous drug. And I knew that it was only going to dull me from what it is that I wanted to do. But when you're in a situation where you're in an intense amount of pain emotionally, and you do that drug that all of a sudden makes it feel like everything's going to be okay, that's when it's dangerous. And that's exactly what happened to me. All of a sudden, all my emotional pain went away. You know, everything, all of the having to get over all of this failure and clusterfuckery of corporate rock and roll. I, through a friend of mine who came out, to work with me, brought some heroin for New York, and I got loaded, and I'm like, oh, I got to keep doing this every day. I finally feel hey again. And I found a local dealer, and I never stopped calling him for 6 months. And by then I was totally strung out.
What was the rock bottom moment for you? Was it when the psych hospital at UCLA?
When I lost my first wife, where I lived, where I worked, all because I worked with my wife at a company. And she just finally had enough of my shit. I had used her up, and she just wanted to move on. You know, I just become such a wretched, full of self-pity, scamming, shady, disconnected human being that she was just like, I'm done with you. It was 7 years of that, So it doesn't matter how much someone loves you, when you just kind of become self-absorbed, because that's what drug addiction is. It's a self-absorption, a self-obsession. You just make it really difficult for everybody around you to love you. And she took care of herself and got the fuck out of that, pulled the ripcord.
But you needed that, right? You have to hit that rock bottom, right?
Oh,
that's the wake-up call. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. No, listen, there's no doubt about it. She saved my life, by walking out on me.
What got you back?
I had to go to rehab.
Right.
I was basically destitute. Fortunately, in LA, there's a program called Music Cares and a program called MAP, Musicians Assistance Program. Those two organizations got it so that I could get into rehab. They covered the cost of it. And then when I got out of rehab, got me into like sober living for a while to transition me. And then even gave me a bit of money to get a first apartment. And from there, I've gotten a job and just started to be able to pay my bills and, go to meetings all the time and stay clean and stay with people who were, point me in the right direction of what to do to get my shit together.
And there was a long period you were living the quote unquote normal life away from music. But then you got
Yeah,
back.
no, I took, because of that sort of can't make music on another label thing, from David Geffen. I was like, okay, well, I got to figure out what to do. And fortunately, I love all the technical stuff of music production. I went to music production school, and I'm always the guy that paid attention to how they wire stuff and patching and all the technical wiring of shit. That I was offered a job working at a really nice venue in LA as a monitor engineer. And about 4 months after that, they offered me the job as the production manager at the venue. And for 7 years, I just spent my days keeping that technical side of the business running and catering to musicians, making a good, fun, productive, live environment for bands and up and coming bands, young bands too, teaching them just how to communicate in that world to make the most of their music. And it was really a lot of fun. It was rewarding. But then it got to the point where, okay, I miss making music. I miss making music with the guys I made music with. We were always friends. So we got together to start making music. And the next thing you know, we're like, okay, got to make a promise right now. This is not going to be about money. This is going to be about music. And everybody's like, cool. We all got jobs, so it wasn't about, well, how much are we going to make on this? We're like, whatever. Some guys go fishing, some guys go hunting, some guys go camping, we go play music. So we
Yeah.
started to go over to Europe, where the band had a strong following. Number one. Number two, the United States is so spread out, it's very expensive to drive around the US. It takes 3 days just to drive across Texas. In 3 hours, you can go to two different countries in Europe. So we booked a tour over there and it went really well. And then we wound up doing that, the UK, and really kept going over there. That's really where the bread and butter of the band has been, keeping it going for the last 12 years now. But that's why we got to really start doing some shows. Like we just did a run of shows with our buddies in Junkyard last week. So we're going to start doing weekend runs, hop on a plane, use an opening band's equipment to like New York, Boston, or Connecticut, and just get back out there. And it's just clubs. It's an intimate thing. It's an honest thing. We hump our own gear. We set up our own shit. There's no crew. There's no delusions of grandeur. It's just honest fucking rock and roll. A night of sort of in your face music with intimate sort of moments in between the songs, where just telling stories and just being grateful to the people that come out.